Hey guys, thanks for joining me. And if you like what you see, please subscribe.
Hello, peoples. Today I'm going to try something crazy. I'm going to open and maintain one of my side opening automatics from ProTech, and I've decided to use my SBR as the example for this. SBR is short-bladed Rockeye. I also have the big boy, the Rockeye, and I have the Strider Plus as well, which is great. And what else do I have? I also have a TR3. Let's see if I can find my, oh, and I also have this TR3 here, which has a locking mechanism. But my oldest and first ProTech that I ever had is the SBR, and I've never opened it. It's an automatic. It has an Ultim side scale on it. I think a lot of the things that I'm about to do are going to apply to all side opening ProTech type knives. This is actually Allen keys here instead of Torx. But your your Torx will work in here. I've never taken apart one of these, but I think that it shouldn't be that hard. So we'll see how this goes. I want to be really careful with the spring, and I want to be really careful with the way that the screws and how I take them out. It's currently perfectly centered. This almost acts like an integral because the whole back is closed. I usually start with a pivot, but this time I am going to start with the back spacers, the back bolts, and I have the wrong hex in there. So the back will work with T6s. Yep, yeah. I just very slowly at the beginning, I just went really slowly to make sure that I didn't strip out that hex head. I didn't. And here it comes out. Obviously, when I pull this apart, I want to be really careful that the spring that's in there doesn't go flying across the room. It's one of the reasons why I'm taking it apart with the blade out, is because there will be less tension, torque on that spring. Another reason why I'm taking out the back spacers first, or the back screws first, is because I really want to concentrate all my energy on keeping the spring from flying everywhere when I take out the pivot, and I'll maybe be in a better position to do that if I take the pivot out last. All right, so pivot was super easy to come out, and it looks like there is some red Loctite on there, but not, actually it looks like a lot, but it worked fine. And I know why that is because I find that ProTech, when they send you a new knife, the pivot is usually locked too tight. So I've already gone ahead and backed this out some, and yeah, so now I'm going to carefully take this apart. I'm just lifting the show scale side off carefully. There we go. The Omega spring is actually on the other side, and I can see it right here. It's sticking through the guy right there. No washers on this. It's just riding straight on the Ultim here, but you can see it's made a path. When you first get a ProTech, you should be able to take the button, hold it all the way in, and take the blade and just tap it a little bit, and it should go straight out. It should just pop straight out, okay? If it doesn't do that, you need to loosen the pivot. And 9 times out of 10, as far as all the ProTechs I've gotten are concerned, you do need to loosen the pivot a little bit. All right, so this button and this lock and this lock pin are all going to want to disassemble very rapidly, and I'm going to do this with my hands over here. And I'm just going to, you know what, well, should I take the pivot out? I think I'm just going to lift up really carefully. All right, I've gotten the button lock off, and here you see the button lock spring down here, or I'll show you in a minute, but there's the button lock. And now the Omega is last, and I'm just going to lift it up off the pivot and let the spring do the turn that it wants to get it out of there. And now it's basically disassembled. So we successfully not shot. I keep saying Omega. It's not an Omega spring. It's like a coil spring. Uh, so here is the blade. You'll see it has some wear and tear here. There's basically no oil on this. And then you've got this inset right here on this side of the blade, and that's where the spring coils up inside. Here's the spring here. Okay. And so this part right here, this little nubbin, goes up into the blade right here. Okay. And then down below, you'll see where the pivot rides and where the spring sits inside this little part right there. That's what is causing it to open so nicely. And then, of course, this is the button lock. On automatics like this, you don't want to use oil. You don't need to use oil. It just needs to be put together well. So why take it apart in the first place? Well, that's one of the reasons why I didn't take it apart. I didn't take it apart because I didn't see a need to take it apart. But I was curious to see how dirty it was, and I was curious to show you enough the inside of this. I have some sparkle. I'm going to guess that sparkle is from one of my daughters. What else do I have? And I just have random dirt and pocket lint in here. So I'm just going to give it the good old cleaning. And I just dropped the drop pin out of there. That also has some dirt on it as well. So we're going to clean that stop pin as well. So I am going to take some Q-tips and some alcohol. Looks like I need to get some new Q-tips down here. I need to remember to do that. I'm going to clean out the inside here very well. You'll also notice the absurd amount of red Loctite they used on this. I'm going to use blue Loctite. The red stuff is very strong and can lead to stripped heads. We don't want that. The blue is medium or light Loctite, and it's just fine. You also notice that the pivot actually doesn't open up. I should say, there's a pivot screw, which we took off, right? But I'm going to take out the spring for the button lock and carefully put it over here so it doesn't roll away. And I'm going to use I'm going to use a cloth that doesn't have lint on it over here. But look, this button, I mean, it looks like this pivot comes out, right? But in practicality, it looks machined in there. And if I'm looking at this pivot correctly, it's looking really worn. Like there's a lot of wear on there, right? And on the inside of the blade, I don't see as much. The DLC coating is still on the inside of the blade pretty much. There is some wear there, but it's almost all gone. I'm not going to try to get this pivot out of here. It looks like there's been some deformation after opening so many times and stuff like that. And I'm just going to say, hey, that's what it is, and move on. You know, I wasn't going to use any oil, but I think I'm just going to use the smallest amount of oil to catch some of this debris and stuff on this pivot. Not for the spring or anything, but just put just a drop right here because this is actually kind of rough. It's an interesting wear pattern. I don't know much about that. I'll have to do some research about that. All right. The Ultim show scale side looks absolutely fine on the inside. You can actually see the machining lines in here a little bit. Probably a CNC router did this, some kind of CNC router type thing. I'm just cleaning this off now. That's the inset for the pearl. And then while this is open, the back comes together to make this integral look, but it's really hard to access when it's together because the caps are closed, the end caps are closed. So now is a perfect time to get all the gunk that has built up inside of here out. So in order to do that, it looks like the tip of the Q-tip is too big, so I'm going to rip off most of the cotton off of that, and then and now it will get in there perfectly and clean out that dirt. I'm not going to bother taking off the pocket clip. It's fine. It's worked all this time. There's no reason to mess with it. Of course, that didn't stop me from taking the SBR apart, but I was curious to see the inside of one. And now I'm going to take the stop pin, clean that up a little bit. Screws should be fine. Button lock, I'm just going to go ahead and wipe it off with just a little bit of alcohol. But again, I don't want any oil on that because that'll probably just cause lock stick. The spring itself looks fine. Again, I'm not going to put any oil on this, but I'll just go ahead and, rub a little bit of alcohol on the sides of it, on the inside, just to make sure that there's no dirt or excess grossness there. And then finally, I'm going to take the blade and I'm going to clean this inside part here and here. And then I am going to take a cloth and clean that off. And while this is open, I'm just going to clean the whole blade. And then what I'm going to do while this is all off and I can see the inside part of, do I have that here? I don't have it here. All right, well, I was going to use some knife shield, but I think I probably left it upstairs. I was going to use some knife shield just to put it all over this and give it a little layer of dried grease, as it were, dried lubricant. But I don't have that down here, so I'm going to go ahead and skip that step. All right, so let's put this together and hopefully we don't forget any parts. First off, we need the lock pin in there, so I'm going to go ahead and put the lock pin back in there. Secondly, we need a spring for the button lock. And then we need the Omega spring back in here. Mega spring has to be seated so that the one stub goes in there and the part that sticks up is in the forward position. Getting the button lock orientated correctly with the blade itself might prove to be a little tricky. I've done it a couple of times though, and so I think that I'll be able to get it, but if you get bogged down at that part, don't worry about it too much. All right, I'm going to put 1 drop of, I was going to use hops number 9, but I think instead what I'm going to use to keep it from running everywhere, I'm going to use some heavy KPL. This stuff is just a little bit less viscous, and I think I even put, I really wanted like 1 drop on there, and I think 2 drops were on there, so I'm just going to take and clean just a little bit off of there. All right, cool. Put the spring back in, and then we're going to get the button lock, and we're going to then put the whole of the spring inside its home here. Keep calling it an Omega spring, but it's not an Omega spring. I'm going to try doing this the other way. I'm going to put this spring on the blade first, and then I am going to put it in the hole and twist it down into place and on to the pivot. Okay, I believe it is on correctly, but the button lock is not there. So we need to add that on, and there's this little space in between, and the button lock needs to be sat around the blade, as it were. So I'm going to undo it just a little bit, and then I'm going to take the button lock and I am going to put it on the button, and then while it's resting on the spring, I'm going to then twist and push the spring and the blade back into place. All right, that worked. Great. Now, I don't want it to do a rapid disassembly all across the basement, so I'm going to take that. Have I forgotten anything? The only thing that I've forgotten at this point is to add a little bit of Loctite inside the threads. I'm not going to worry about that right now, though. I'm going to go ahead and take my Ultim scale, and I am going to put it on and try to get it all lined up and copacetic now. All right, it is all lined up. I'm going to push the button lock while I'm grasping this tightly, just to make sure that this is all lined up and seems to be working correctly. The pin is in the Ultim scale now. Cool, cool, great. So now this is all together, and I'm going to take my lock bar tool from my watch kit, but any small pokey thing will work. You can also just take the Loctite and put it directly on the threads. I like to put it on a bar tool and stick it down into the holes this way. That way I'm not dealing with a screw that has a bunch of Loctite flying around while I'm getting it seated. It's already just inside the threads. But either method is absolutely fine, I'm sure. Some people prefer one way, some people prefer the other. Tomato, tomato, potato, potato. All right, so I'm going to put the screws back in the opposite direction. I want to make sure that this pivot stays all put together with the spring correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and just I didn't tighten this down too much. I just put that in there a little bit. And now while the pivot is in there and this seems to be locked tight, I'm going to push the push button to make sure it's working correctly. And I'm going to close the knife while squeezing the back of it because it's not locked in. It's still locked. I'm going to fire it. All right, seems to be working. Everything seems to be working great. I'm going to continue by putting in the next screws. Honestly, I did not need to do this disassembly, but I thought it would be cool to look inside, and it was cool. I didn't realize how the pivot was engineered, and now I kind of understand why you don't really need any oil for these guys. It was interesting to see all that wear and tear on the pivot. On the clip side. Yeah, I don't know what that's about. Was that because for a long time, and this is the oldest knife and I've had it for the longest, is it because for the longest time I had it and I had the pivot tightened down too much? And so it was causing more wear before I loosened it up? Is it just a natural thing with side opening automatics? Very interesting. And like I said, all of these ProTech side opening automatics, for the most part with these button locks, the TR3, the Strider, the Rockeye, all work the same way. So what I just did should work for yours too. All right, pivot's a little loose, but that's because I only tightened it up just a little bit. And I know that's loose just because I can see it's the pivot is actually proud. Sticking up above the ultimate. Do know that this needs to be loose-ish though, but that's why we use the Loctite. Are we centered? We are perfectly centered still. And now I'm going to do my test. I'm going to push the button all the way in. And yeah, it's good. So this would also, obviously be a good way to replace your spring. If you ever feel like it's not snappy enough, you can get a replacement spring and replace it. There we go. We're all good. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you liked what you saw, I'd really love your support. You can support me by becoming a Patreon member. There's a link in the description. You can also become a channel member by just clicking on the support channel for the YouTube. It says become a channel member down there too. I also do a monthly giveaway for Patreon members, and I have very few Patreon members, so chances of you winning are very high, although not guaranteed. I'm also very close to 1,000 subscribers, so if you subscribe right now, when I do become a proud channel with 1,000 subscribers, I will be giving away a nice expensive knife. I haven't said what that is yet, but I think it's something special. Again, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time on Sharp Ends. Bye-bye now.